Hey, Phoenix East Smug. I am Rocky Bowles from SMUG, and with me today is Ken Sklute. He is going to be speaking at the SMUG on April 11th. Ken is one of only 60 Canon Explorers of Light. Ken has enjoyed a diverse career photographing people, professional sports, architecture, wedding, and landscapes. Ken spends much of his time teaching and going around the country, and I cannot tell you how many awards Ken has won. Hi, Ken. Thanks so much for joining me. I figured if I put all the awards up, we would never get done with our hangout today.
Well, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
So in your 38 years as a photographer, what I find so interesting is that you started out with capturing race cars. How did that lead into wedding photography, wedding and portrait photography?
You know, it's a funny, quick little story that I grew up building model cars and then went to see the cars at the racetrack, and I've kind of been covered by serendipity all my life. And a race driver threw me a rag and told me to do something, which led me into, they took me onto the racetrack right next to this 3,000 horsepower car. So I brought a Kodak Instamatic with me and ended up selling photographs from the first roll of film I shot. So that in itself was beautiful. That led me to photography. And then living in New York, the segue to weddings came because after a couple of years, that occurred when I was 14 years old. So I really, really was lucky to have had my life carved out so early. But then when I was 16 and I was actually driving, I needed money when the season ended. So in October and November, when the snows came to Long Island, I had no other way of making money again until April. So I met and apprenticed with a wedding photographer. And before you knew it, I was photographing weddings, and I had to give up racing.
Oh, so that overtook the love of racing. So the money took it over, eh?
You know, capitalism won early.
Oh, I completely understand that one. So at the Phoenix East Smug, you're going to be talking about seeing the unseen. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, there are so many things, you know, that I've learned about seeing and teaching people over the years now that I've been teaching. And one of the things I think, you know, I'll go back to Henry David Thoreau, who said, it's not important what we look at, but what we see. And I see a lot of photographers, you know, they point the camera and they don't really see what's in front of them. They're taking a picture, but their nerves get a hold of them, or they kind of get this tunnel vision, if you would. Mm-hmm. So I love to open people's minds. I love to speak inspirationally and not just about one topic, but ultimately how to look in front of you, see something, and often with good photography, you have to complete the equation. There isn't always everything sitting in front of you. You might have to wait for a minute, or I'll just use an example. This past week, I was in a wild calla lily grove in California. It's just magnificent. And I was out there at sunrise, but I had to wait until the calla lilies stopped blowing for that one quick second, because now I was doing an HDR, a 5-exposure HDR, down to a 2-second exposure. So I really needed to stare that flower down to make sure it wasn't going to move and give me a sharp exposure. So there's so much in seeing. But I've got a few examples when we get to that.
Great. Yes. No, please share some examples.
What I brought up here is just that whole concept of seeing something that maybe isn't there. I was just on a trip to Iceland recently, and here I was in the geothermal area, and it was just at sunset, and I had to actually, sometimes we have to back up. You know, I liken this to sitting on a lot of airplanes that I do and traveling, and as they go through, as a stewardess goes through the briefing of what you need to know, buckle your seatbelt and do all this, and they acquaint you, the closest exit may be behind you. And I've kind of translated that into photography, that sometimes the better photograph is behind you, right? Just because we're standing where we are, maybe if we back up 50 feet, there's an entirely different photograph. And that's what I saw here. It was the fog, the sulfuric fog here, that smelly as it was, and you know, we look at it as ugly in a sensorial way. Visually, it just added this cloud. It just gave me this perception of being inside a cloud looking at this sunset.
It's
So,
amazing.
and there are so many amazing things that go on, and some of the elements, and what I love to talk about and wake people up to see, is the idea of you have to move quickly. When you see something, you have to record it now because it may be gone in 10 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. And that'll kind of contradict the idea of some of the things I wait for an hour or two for the right thing to fall into place. So a lot of times as photographers, we have to make a judgment call on commitment to an image. If we think it's really strong, right, then we're going to sit and wait it out. But there are times where we don't get to do that. We just have to make that image immediately.
I like the term commitment to an image.
Well, it is. One of the things that I'll be showing, I didn't prepare any here to acquaint people with some of the imagery, but I've been on a lifelong quest of capturing images of Amish people.
Wow.
And that's a whole body of work in itself, and I'll be sharing a lot of that on April 11th at the SMUG meeting. But again, you have to be prepared because you take the photograph now. You don't have time to think about it. And I've got some images that I'll be happy to share the stories with that evening. Something that's disappearing in a heartbeat that I just had to make the photograph, and that requires a lot of time. That requires being in total command of your camera equipment, that you know where things are, because we don't have time to take an exposure and evaluate it or look down at the camera, but to know it intimately, where you can turn one dial with one finger or a wheel with the other, and it puts you where you need to be, because that moment is fleeting. So,
Did you have any other images to share with us, Ken?
I do. I would love to.
Sure, go right ahead.
Something that I've been chasing, and this year was sort of the end of the cycle for the Aurora Borealis. It seems to appear and disappear, and what I mean by that, it's at the end of this 12-year cycle, so it's going to go pretty quiet for the next decade or so, and that to me is sad, because I think this is the most magnificent thing on Earth, and it's actually in the heavens. But this is just looking straight up into a sky where you can barely see anything, but the understanding of the sensitivity of your camera, you can sometimes see beyond what's not visually in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So there was very little of this available, but just trying to, and one of the more difficult things that we have to do as photographers, especially on a longer exposure like this, is shooting straight up. Getting your tripod to that position where it's not going to tip over by tipping it back, and there's a lot of things that we go through as photographers to capture images. So I put this one in as just a little tease in terms of what we can look forward to.
Wow, I didn't know that it goes away.
Oh, it does. It comes and it goes, and it's been the brightest and the most frequent that it's been, like in a little more than a decade.
Wow.
And I went and visited it 5 times this past year, and most recent being 1 month ago. Well, actually, so it got me back 2 weeks ago. I guess I've been home 2 weeks from, in this next photograph that's up in front of you, this is also Iceland. This is an ice lagoon, and taken right at what would be considered sunset. So I found a piece of ice that was going to reflect the colors in the sky and turned it into a little bit of prismatic reflection, just based on understanding the idea of how light works, and that the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflectance. That there really is only one place to stand to get this reflection in this piece of sheet ice.
Oh my God, I don't even know what to say. These images are so beautiful. I'm like just staring at them.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I've got 2 more to share if I can.
Sure, please do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think this one speaks exactly to the topic that that I wanted to present here, the idea of seeing the unseen. What's happening here? First off, this is in the pouring rain, so rain doesn't mean we don't take photographs. There's about a 40-mile-an-hour sustained wind, and better than that, as you can see, the surf is coming in and out. And if I'm correct, this was like a 1.6-second exposure in these rather negative conditions, but I'm standing on a black beach, right? Black lava, black sand. And what I did was I kind of coordinated my composition here to include what I hoped was going to happen. So I didn't get to see this, but I certainly left room for it. So when the water kind of came rushing in and then ultimately rushing back out to the ocean, I have, this is, everything that I'm sharing with you is full frame. So I don't crop anything. I get it right in the camera as best I can. So I left an area here hoping that the water was going to come in and do this, and serendipitously it occurred.
How big are those ice chunks?
Oh, I guess they'd be about 3 or 4 feet. The one the furthest away, which is just over the foreground chunk, that's probably about 6 or 8 feet long.
Wow.
Yeah, they're magnificent. Just what you would find every day was totally different. It was
That's
such an
amazing.
exciting trip. And then I think, I've got one more for you here.
Sure.
You know, just kind of showing people the way of, you know, getting right down into something. Having a strong foreground is something that I learned very early in my career and something I love to share with people. And there's certainly a number of techniques here. Wide-angle lens right close to the water, so I'm really dealing with the foreground. And this is a 5-second exposure. So the water's really rushing by and becoming this soft, muted, beautiful, harmonious tonal range that at a 1/25th of a second is frozen and hard and cold and not really pleasant to look at. And then working with a graduated neutral density filter to bring the horizon, anything above the horizon, down in density, so it's all captured evenly, if you would. It's one simple exposure with, and of course, something complex turns out to be simple. But I try to get everything right in the camera, so this way you're in control of your domain. We don't sit there trying to correct problems, but once we actually get into post-processing, how to make them even better.
Well, you certainly have a lot to teach people from this. Just seeing the unseen is amazing as you explain it.
Well, thank you. You know, to me, it's an important thing. When you go to learn something, when you go to see somebody, you really want to go home with some knowledge that you can put to use right away. And I kind of take pride in that there's always meat in my programs. When you see a presentation, you're going to go home affected.
And that's fantastic, because that leads us into the next question that I was going to ask you, which is, what do you feel is the main takeaway from your presentation?
I guess, you know, looking at this one, looking at a majority of them, and, you know, I probably have 15 different presentations ready at any one time. But overall, I think the main thing that people take home from this presentation is the idea of how to look, how to see things differently, how to understand preparation, and first off, even packaging your camera bag correctly, having the right tools with you. And I even go into the idea now of thinking, while I'm in the field, I'm thinking about maybe what application I can use, like HDR. If I don't like the exposure that I see in front of me, or it's too complicated to capture, then, you know, I have to think while I'm standing there, how much information do I need, and, you know, what kind of exposures will I need to go into HDR so that I can work and produce the image like I see it in my mind's eye, only after the fact. So people attending what I'm going to present will go home with a new way of looking at things, and certainly an excitement and an invigoration to get out there and to try some of these techniques that I guess I use on a daily basis.
So this is going to be a great presentation for all types of photographers, for anybody that really wants to come out, see some great photography, and learn how to see the unseen. So make sure you register today to see Ken at the Phoenix SMUG. He will be making an appearance on April 11th. Thanks, Ken, for speaking at the SMUG and giving us a taste of what to expect. It's such a privilege to chat with you today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Rocky. Thanks so much for putting this together.
Yep, and then I'll have a quick link for everybody to click on so that they can register right away. Thanks, Ken. Have a great day.
You too, Rocky. Thank you.